Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing a breaking headline moment that signals a potential catastrophic fracture within the leadership of the Indiana Fever. Last night on a national broadcast ahead of the Knicks and Lakers game, Caitlin Clark publicly declared that the player she models her game after is Luka Dončić. This admission has placed her on a direct philosophical collision course with her new head coach, Stephanie White. We have uncovered archival audio where Stephanie White explicitly dismantles the Luka Dončić style of play, praising teams that move away from that high-usage superstar model. This is not just a difference in taste. This is a fundamental conflict of identity between the franchise savior who wants to dominate the ball and a head coach who has gone on record despising that exact brand of basketball. We need to dissect exactly what happened last night because the implications for the upcoming WNBA season are massive. Caitlin Clark was featured as a special analyst on NBC, standing center court at Madison Square Garden. When pressed about her basketball influences and the current NBA archetype she relates to most, she did not say Steph Curry, and she did not say Larry Bird. She dropped a name that carries a very specific weight in the basketball world: Luka Dončić.
Specifically because there's things in his game maybe you would want to add to yours in the league?
Man, I think Luka. Luka's amazing and he's incredible. I think the way he can not only score the ball, but also the way he passes. And I think the thing about him is, he's not the fastest, he's not the most athletic, but he can get his defender to move where he wants him to go, and he takes up that space, and he does a really good job of either keeping the defender behind him or keeping him to the side. So I think that's something I can certainly learn from. I always kind of want to run away from the defense rather than absorbing the contact and taking up the space that they give me. So I think, obviously, he's pretty incredible. He averages like a 30-point triple-double. So he makes it look pretty easy, but I can promise you it's not that easy.
Yeah, he is coming off a triple-double. You got that right.
To the casual fan, that sounds like a compliment to a fellow superstar. But to those paying attention to the Indiana Fever's coaching situation, that name is a declaration of war against the system Stephanie White prefers. You have to understand the context of what Stephanie White has said in the past to understand the danger of what Caitlin Clark said last night.
A wrist sprain in that game and has been out since. And that puts a lot on the plate of players like Spencer Dinwiddie, who just came in, who finds Marshall for the corner three.
When you see the Mavs just play differently without Luka on the floor. He's a guy who's high usage rate, the ball's in his hands. When he's not on the floor, that ball is moving, it's popping. Multiple players getting involved in action, and everyone's stepping up.
Lower usage rate for him this year. A wrist sprain in that game and has been out.
There is a documented history here. There is footage, there is audio, and there are receipts. Stephanie White provided analysis following a Mavericks trade scenario involving Dončić, specifically referencing games where Luka was absent due to a wrist sprain. Her take on the situation was not just an observation, it was a critique of the heliocentric, superstar-driven offense. In that clip, Stephanie White spoke with a palpable sense of relief when describing the Mavericks without Luka. She talked about how the ball was popping. She talked about how multiple players were getting involved. She explicitly criticized the high usage rate of Dončić and implied that the team played a more beautiful, more effective brand of basketball when the superstar was not suffocating the offense. She used words that described a collective effort, a system-first approach, and she did it while sounding disdainful of the ball-dominant style that defines Luka Dončić. Now, fast forward to last night. You have Caitlin Clark, the most dynamic offensive weapon in the history of women's college basketball, sitting on national television and telling the world, "That is who I am. That is who I emulate." Clark is telling us she wants to be the high-usage engine. She wants the ball in her hands. She wants to be the Luka of the WNBA. And she is about to walk into a training camp run by a coach who believes that style of basketball stifles the team. This is what we call a maroon flag. It is redder than red. It is a warning siren blaring in the middle of the offseason. If you are a fan of Caitlin Clark, this should be terrifying. We all want to see Clark cook. We want to see her unleashing deep threes, breaking down defenses off the dribble, and making those dynamic, high-risk, high-reward passes. That is the Luka Dončić package. That is what sells tickets. That is what wins games in the modern era. But if you gave Stephanie White a dose of truth serum, would she tell you that she actually wants that? Or would she tell you that she prefers a game where Caitlin Clark is just one of 5 parts, moving the ball, cutting, and sacrificing her dominance for the sake of popping the ball around the perimeter? The disconnect here is palpable. It raises the question of what exactly happened during the hiring process. We see this all the time in professional sports, specifically in the NFL coaching cycles. A coach walks into an interview with a desperate ownership group. They look at the superstar quarterback on the roster, or in this case, the superstar point guard, and they tell the owners exactly what they want to hear. They promise to unlock the player. They promise to build around their unique talents. They blow smoke to get the contract. But once the ink is dry and the headset is on, the truth comes out. They try to force a square peg into a round hole because their ego demands a system that they control, rather than a system controlled by the talent. Did Stephanie White look the Indiana Fever brass in the eye and lie about her offensive philosophy? Because her public comments about Luka Dončić suggest that she fundamentally disagrees with the way Caitlin Clark wants to play basketball. Clark sees herself as the conductor of the orchestra, the singular force that dictates every tempo and every possession. White sees that style as a problem to be solved, not an asset to be utilized. When you listen to White's past comments, you can hear the disdain in her tone. She talks about the high usage like it's a disease that infects the team. She praises the movement and the action when the superstar sits. That is the language of a coach who wants to be the star. That is the language of a coach who believes their whiteboard X's and O's are more valuable than the generational talent standing on the floor. And now, she has been handed the keys to the most high-usage, ball-dominant prospect the league has ever seen. This marriage is starting to look broken before the honeymoon has even begun. You cannot have a quarterback who wants to air it out and a coach who wants to run the triple option. You cannot have a point guard who wants to be Luka and a coach who hates Luka ball. Something has to give. And usually, in professional sports, when the superstar and the coach have a fundamental philosophical disagreement, it results in a power struggle that tears the franchise apart. The danger here is that Stephanie White will try to fix Caitlin Clark. We have seen coaches try to rein in superstars before. They try to make them more efficient by taking the ball out of their hands. They try to make them play within the flow. And what happens? The superstar becomes frustrated. The rhythm is lost. The magic that made them special is suffocated by a coach's rigid adherence to a system that doesn't fit the personnel. If White tries to turn Clark into a pass-first, off-ball role player to satisfy her fetish for ball movement, she will be committing professional malpractice. We have been warning about this. Content creators who actually watch the tape and listen to the audio have been sounding the alarm on Stephanie White's philosophy for months. The mainstream sports media will tell you it's a great hire. They will tell you she's an experienced coach who knows the game. But they are ignoring the evidence. They are ignoring the fact that White has explicitly devalued the exact archetype that Clark represents. Clark's choice of Luka is not accidental. She is a student of the game. She knows what Luka represents. He represents total offensive control. He represents the triple-double threat every single night. He represents a player who can single-handedly dismantle a defense because the defense is terrified of what he will do with the ball. By aligning herself with him, Clark is signaling her intent. She is telling the Fever organization, "This is how I play. This is how I win." Now contrast that with Stephanie White watching a Mavericks game and thinking, "Wow, this looks so much better without that guy." That is a scary level of cognitive dissonance for a coach taking over this specific team. It suggests that deep down, she might prefer a version of the Fever where Clark is diminished, a version where the team is the star. But nobody bought season tickets to watch the Indiana Fever run a motion offense where everyone touches the ball equally. They bought tickets to watch Caitlin Clark dominate. This situation feels like a ticking time bomb. The season hasn't even started and we already have the lines drawn in the sand. On one side, you have the player, the franchise, the economy of the WNBA, all resting on the shoulders of a Luka-style superstar. On the other side, you have a coach with a track record of preferring a system that neutralizes that kind of player. If Stephanie White is smart, she will realize that her previous takes on Luka Dončić were wrong, or at least inapplicable to this situation. She needs to realize that when you have a Ferrari, you don't drive it like a Prius just to save gas. You drive it fast. You put the ball in Clark's hands and you let her make the decisions. But ego is a powerful thing in coaching. It is very hard for a coach to admit that their system is secondary to the talent. The visual of Clark on that broadcast last night was striking. She looked comfortable. She looked confident. She looked like a player who knows exactly who she is. She didn't stutter when she said Luka. She didn't hesitate. That is her North Star. And then you play the audio of Stephanie White, and it sounds like she is talking about a different sport. It sounds like she is talking about a style of play from 20 years ago. This is the narrative that is going to define the early part of the Fever season. Every time the offense stagnates, every time Clark gives up the ball and stands in the corner, every time the, quote, system fails to produce points, fans are going to remember that Stephanie White prefers it this way. They are going to remember that she thinks the ball, quote, pops better when the superstar isn't, quote, high usage. And the pressure is going to mount immediately. We have to ask ourselves, is Stephanie White one of those coaches, or perhaps one of those figures in the WNBA, who harbors a subconscious resentment toward the way Clark plays? We know there is jealousy in the league. We know there is animosity. We have seen it from other players. Is it possible that the head coach shares some of that sentiment? Is it possible that she looks at Clark's style and sees selfishness where the rest of us see greatness? Her comments about Luka certainly suggest that she views high-usage players as a detriment to the beauty of the game. She described the Mavericks without Luka as having multiple players getting involved in the action. That sounds great in a clinic. It sounds great in a textbook. But in the pros, you win with stars. And if you have a coach who is philosophically opposed to letting the star be the star, you have a disaster waiting to happen. The indicators are flashing. The red flags are maroon. This is not a drill. We are looking at a fundamental incompatibility between the most important player in the league and the person hired to lead her. Caitlin Clark has laid her cards on the table. She wants to be Luka. Stephanie White has already told us she hates Luka ball. This is the storyline that nobody in the traditional media wants to touch because it requires acknowledging that the Fever might have made a massive mistake. It requires acknowledging that the coach might be wrong. But the audio doesn't lie. The quotes don't lie. White said what she said. Clark said what she said. And those two statements cannot coexist peacefully for very long. As we move closer to the season, watch the body language. Watch the play calling. Watch how often the ball is taken out of Clark's hands in crunch time. If we see the Fever trying to run a system offense while Clark stands and watches, we will know exactly why. We will know it's because Stephanie White is trying to prove a point. She is trying to prove that her way is better than the Luka way. But history tells us that the Luka way, the Caitlin Clark way, is the winning way. It is the way that changes franchises. It is the way that sells out arenas. If White tries to fight that tide, she will drown. The fans will turn on her. The ownership will eventually have to choose. And in a battle between a superstar who generates millions and a coach with a philosophy that hates superstars, the superstar is going to win every time. We need to keep our eyes on this. This was a subtle moment on a pregame show, but it was a revelation. It was a peek behind the curtain at the brewing storm in Indiana. Caitlin Clark is ready to take the reins. She is ready to be the high-usage alpha. The only thing standing in her way might be her own head coach, and that is a conflict that could define the entire WNBA season.